welcome back to my channel. So today I'm going to be reading another article from the December 2020 edition of A Light Paper, A Truth Paper, link to which is in the description. It's a free paper, so go and take a look. The article I'm reading today is called Fear, the Trojan Horse for Tyranny. And it's an article by Dustin Broadbury. So let's zoom in. Okay. Admittedly, this is not your standard issue industrialised, globalised takeover of society. Why would it be? Fascism has come a long way since Hitler. Nowadays, the general population is too smart. We would recognise the face of tyranny, and not this garden variety imposter, or so we think. Besides, without the Allies landing on the beaches of Normandy, how could we be under siege? We reassure ourselves before crawling back into captivity in a comforting lockstep with less fortunate nations. Adaptation is a wonderful thing, but maybe not for us. In keeping with the opaque nature of this political confidence trick, this is not your typical dictatorship either. Instead, it's Middle England's answer to a military junta, carrying the letters of marque from Her Majesty's government to legitimise its piracy, courted by the ivory towers of science and medicine, and extolled as a force for good by a population sleepwalking towards the edge of disaster. Meanwhile, society burns ritualistically to the ground. But that's okay. We can build back better from the ashes. Or so we are told repeatedly. The controlled demolition of society, made possible by the COVID-19 agenda, places us at the gates of hell, somewhere between freedom and slavery, fighting a battle for humanity against a government who have become the occupational hazard of being human. In little under 8 months, those who go under the sobriquet of protector of individual freedom from tyranny have taken on the mantle of oppressor, turning on the people of this nation, taking legal control over our lives, removing our personal agency, dictating where we can go and who we can meet. Irrespective of these historic infractions on our freedom, we obediently roll over rather than disturb the hornet's nest and industriously heed the call of showman politicians who have enlisted us, unaware that culpability has been passed from the overlords to the victims of their tyranny. We are all in this together, is another blandishment from this Prime Minister, despite his inner circle ruling this country by ministerial decree since March, rolling out the most injurious legislation in history without recourse to scrutiny, debates or votes in Parliament, engagement with civil society, or indeed risk assessment of the impact of these laws, and which the lawmakers themselves do not obey, in the time-honoured tradition of a one rule for those making the rules but another rule for everyone else. Following a handful of idle sessions at the House of Commons, liberties older than Parliament itself have been nullified on the basis of a disease with an average mortality age of 82. What has been achieved on this basis by the architects of this apocalypse is not only reprehensible, it is ingenious. Uniting millions behind the cult of COVID, transcending decades of the usual propaganda, behavioural engineering, the manufacturing of consent, mitigating the expense of war, terrorism, or whatever chicanery has been at the disposal of those in power, grooming us towards a controlled destination. In this particular watershed, a permanent checkpoint of our democracy to issue the terms of our servitude, called the biosecurity state. This journey towards the wrong side of history is made possible by subtle nuances of control, confusion and fear that most fail to perceive, engineering the wholesale abandonment of logic and reason to a seemingly benevolent cult who alone offer protection against our seemingly immediate day of reckoning. The threat of death strikes an uncomfortable chord, and our ability to adapt makes us low-hanging fruit. But who could have predicted fascism would look so ordinary from inside the panopticon? Once we are plugged into a shared digital matrix, a state of emergency can rapidly contaminate consensus until forced collectivism flourishes like wildfire. Meanwhile, measured perspective becomes an act of war. Who wants to be on the wrong side of a cult when those failing to bend a knee to COVID are, by disassociation, guilty with blood on their hands? This entire process works because the fertile ground for any dictatorship to prosper is fear. A state of emergency unites us with common purpose. And what could be more compelling than a pandemic? Death, like communism, levels the playing field of all distinctions. Regardless of class, age, gender or race, death is indiscriminate. Reaffirming the normalcy of our departure from one place of relative safety to another is straightforward enough. Safety is, after all, relative to the setting of the emergency. The higher the alert level, the safer we feel in the herd, regardless of small matters such as the number of prison bars holding us captive. In a strong enough current, people are like driftwood, trying to dock in the reeds. Remember the motto of this thing from the outset: the new normal. The pandemic hunkers down on the blitz spirit of the British people. Boris plays Churchill, and the propagandists ensnare a nation under mass hypnosis, who muzzle their senses and clap for their captors. As important matters of frontline battle are the prerogative of the Johnson regime, who work round the clock to dampen, depress and demoralise the public spirit, criminalising just about every form of human expression conceivable. In this Kafkaesque rendition of reality, an arsenic cough, the assassin's handshake are the crimes against humanity, while our personal hygiene and voluntary associations stand before the Nuremberg trials. COVID is the greatest operation to divide and rule in human history, factionalising family members, separating each from their powers of reason, and weaponising society as a Black Death, whose panacea is an unrelenting assault on the basic joys of life and other misguided freedoms that we are told are the agents of our suffering. The cautionary tale from history should teach us that the surrendering of our rights out of fear of some existential threat is never a good idea. Typically, it's a threat hatched by a government looking to cross the Rubicon from protector of individual liberty to regulator of the cycle socio-sexual. Dictating who we may and may not procreate with is yet another compulsion of cult ideology, which should be enough to convince most we are already living under tyranny. On the contrary, those with front row tickets, prostrated in self-imposed exile, bribed with government kickbacks, and disguising their own fear of death as compassion for others, would disagree, claiming, amongst other platitudes, it's only for another 6 months, even if it means saving just one life. 2020 is the year that was cancelled. You wear a seatbelt, but not a face covering? This is despite the overwhelming body of evidence that we are not the victims of indiscriminate, extemporaneous encroachments on our liberties, but rather our rights are being permanently dismantled through a carefully planned sequence of events, where the previous imposition makes way for the next tightening of the screw. The volitional guidelines for the hospitality industry to track and trace our movements has predictably been wrapped up to mandatory. Anticipating the next iteration in this sequence, gun to your head contact tracing across all interfaces of the economy, our workspaces, public transport, international flights and supermarkets. Or, for those refusing to comply, then it's no ticket, no laundry, and the emergence of COVID apartheid. You have been warned. Okay, so that's the end of this article, and on the next episode I will be reading this one, Wi-Fi Radiation, a generational tragedy, by Catherine Hooper. Thank you for listening and watching. Do all the normal things, like, share, subscribe and all of that. And until next time, take care of yourself. Thank you very much. Bye bye.